Can I have a moment before I begin this video? Willy Wonka has been my medium. Throughout the whole year, I've basically turned into the biggest Willy Wonka fan ever. I've always had trouble finding those things to be thoroughly invested in. I've tried, but they've never legitimately stuck. And then, in late 2021, I got into Willy Wonka. The amount of stuff there is to be invested in is just enormous. Fun facts and tidbits about the films, the backstories and unused content behind the books, anything and everything from Nestle's old Wonka branch, even Willy Wonka video games, of all things, have stuff to be interested in. Willy Wonka has also given me a purpose to start uploading on YouTube again. I do know that my channel is dead and it will probably remain that way like forever, but no matter the amount of views I have or the subscribers that come in, I will always be grateful that the information that is on my videos does get attention, and I would like to thank you guys, the small audience who still watches my videos. Thank you so much for being my small little support group and always taking the time to watch my videos. Being able to invest myself in the Wonka name and being able to share my knowledge with the world, no matter the hurdles that crappily aged technology throws my way, it's really raised my self-esteem, and I've been more confident in sharing a lot of things, which feels downright impossible. Trust me, if you've been on and off depressed for over 7 years like me, then you kinda lose hope in yourself and everything around you. And Wonka has done the impossible. I feel like hopeful, almost, if that's the correct word I'm looking for. There are a few other pieces of media that come to mind that do similar things, like Elijah Eclipse being like the best indie game ever. Seriously, please go check it out if you haven't already. The Portal game is coming to the Nintendo Switch of all consoles. And speaking of which, the fact that Pikmin freaking 4, and it's official, it's coming out. It's just the most impossible thing in the world to me, but it's real. 2022 has taught me to never say never. And to celebrate this and Willy Wonka, I have decided to rank every official Willy Wonka character design that has been used throughout the 60 some odd years that the character has been alive. Let's take a look at how many plastic surgeries the dude has had. Okay, before we begin, rules for this video. I will be reviewing every major character design for Willy Wonka that has been officially approved under the Roald Dahl estate. No fan versions or parodies, they need to be quote-unquote official. Also, versions of Wonka that I feel are too similar to any other version will not be included. That's why I'm not talking about any of the Broadway musicals in this video, for the record. Also, I need to emphasize this, I am ranking most of these based on Willy Wonka the character and not by the media he appears in. Not by the movie or book or whatever. I may be a little biased when it comes to the circumstances surrounding them. For example, Book Wonka, which I will get into. I will not be including Timothée Chalamet's version of Wonka onto this list. It doesn't really feel right for me to judge something that hasn't even been brought into existence yet, at least not fully. Okay, enough exposition, let's get into the video. The very first version of Wonka ever naturally appeared in the 1964 novel Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. I cannot get away with saying that without a smile on my face. Did Willy Wonka get off to a great start? Mostly, yes. This version of Wonka was a short old dude who had a plum-colored suit and bottle green pants. Is bottle green even a real color? Pearly gloves, a gold-tipped cane, and he had a black goatee and top hat. The color of his hair varies between book covers. In older illustrations and in some stage plays, it's portrayed as black, but some newer designs portray him with gray hair. This version of Wonka also has a high whistly voice. I don't know how to feel about that, actually. I think the original version of Wonka is pretty good, but I don't think he's perfect. Despite him literally being Genesis Wonka, he really doesn't have the sort of mass novelty that other versions of the character are known for. He does have quite a bit of it, but not like all of it. Seeing this version of Wonka after being so used to other versions of the character just feels odd. Like, oh wow, this is what this dude looked like. Okay. The popularity of the character just sort of makes the original book version look really off by comparison. That, and this is the Roald Dahl Wonka, and in the context of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory specifically, Roald Dahl has done some questionable things. Like, for publication of the book before 1973, there were literally racist Oompa Loompas. They were portrayed as little black African dwarf people that Wonka smuggled from the jungles in Africa, and he makes them work in the chocolate factory, and he pays them in cocoa beans. I'm not making this up. And it also took the NAACP yelling at Dahl to make him change it in 1973. Now they're portrayed as like little hippie pixie people with long blonde hair and wearing loincloths. That fact just really unsettles me. So this version of Wonka is getting a low A. This version of Wonka right here, this guy needs no introduction. This is what most people think of when you say Willy Wonka. Gene Wilder's performance of Wonka here is, to say the least, just awesome. This version of Wonka has so many memorable quotes and moments, like they took Wonka and made him a comedian and bookworm, and by some miracle of God himself, it works. Like, I can imagine Wonka, not just this Wonka, but also Book Wonka, when everything in the factory is in check and he has nothing to do. Like, he just sits in his office and reads Shakespearean plays or something. It's just, the sheer irony of it just fits so well. And the little quips he makes too, like, they feel more like him trying to be funny and lighten the mood, instead of him being a jerk. However, this version of Wonka is kind of brought down by, like, one kind of major thing. In terms of being what I guess could be called a port of Book Wonka, he kind of sucks some blows, actually. Like, it's not offensively bad because they don't pull anything really stupid, and they do keep to the overall plot of the book without a lot of major changes, but there are still so many small things that are just sort of there and it gets in your face at times. Like Wonka being a bookworm, it's something I don't mind, but if you listen to the book and watch the film back to back, it gets kinda distracting. And the fact that he snaps from Charlie at Grandpa Joe, it's such an epic and iconic moment. But I feel like Gene Wilder here was a bit too aggressive. It doesn't really feel like Book Wonka. I don't imagine Book Wonka just sort of snapping like this. Yes, I know there was that one story that Grandpa Joe was telling Charlie about how Wonka was ripping his beard because he was all mad about corporate espionage and all that, but even if the whole fizzy lifting drink fiasco wasn't in the film and Wonka still got mad at them somehow, I feel like he should have been a bit softer in his approach. This amount of rage just does not fit Wonka, at least in the setting where it happened. I can get where he's coming from. Charlie and Grandpa Joe were like the last candidates who could have possibly been heirs to his throne, and they were mostly well behaved, but at the same time they broke the rules and disqualified themselves. And I can sense heartbreak from Wonka here, but still it feels not right. And in terms of design, it's yes, but also no. Yes, because he just sort of fits the image of Wonka, an eccentric and random old dude who's all peppy and playful. At the same time, however, there are a lot of little liberties they took with the book design. Like, Book Wonka had green trousers, not beige dress pants, and his top hat was black and not orange, and his hair was either silver or black, not also orange. And from what I remember, Book Wonka had a goatee. Like, I know these are a lot of nitpicks. They are relatively small, but they're still just there. I will give them this, though. It's nowhere near as bad as some other versions of Willy Wonka. We're thankfully not at that part of the video yet, but we'll get there. Believe me, we'll get there. Overall, this version of Wonka is getting a high A. You want to know another awesome thing the 1971 film spawned? An official Wonka candy company, known back then as Breaker Confections. I've gushed and gushed about this company time and time before, so I will mostly avoid gushing about it here until later in the video when I feel it's appropriate. If you are curious, I have cited an article in the description that does talk about the company and its history. Speaking of the company, their very first mascot was a simple cartoon version of Wonka. His color palette differs wildly from time to time, but like, I feel like the most definitive one would be him having like this blue coat with big red buttons, a dark orange-ish brown top hat, and his hair differs from time to time. At times it's a blonde mullet, and at other times it's a more detailed mullet. How would that work? Not a whole lot of content survives under his name, unfortunately. Well, one thing I can point to, they had this American Trip sweepstakes thing back during like 1990. That's cool, I guess. Funnily enough, the most notable thing about this mascot is that it's the one who survived the longest. From what I can gather, this mascot survived from like 1971 or 1972 all the way up until sometime in the early 90s. That's like 20 some odd years of this guy. Do I think he overstayed his welcome? Kinda. Don't get me wrong, it's a really cute and charming design, but after at least like a decade, I would imagine people would get a little tired of it. The company would need to change something in order to stay relevant, wouldn't they? In the end, it wouldn't have mattered because Nestle offed this company without caring at all, but still. One factor that helped Breaker Wonka in this aspect is that he was used with a real-life mascot, which I really do think helped with his longevity and really added to his charm. This version of Wonka is getting a low A. Okay, so this is the mascot that was used in tandem with Breaker Wonka and the next Wonka mascot coming up. And you wanna know the real funny thing? This dude does so much of a good job at what he does to the point where he would make a great mascot by himself. Even more so than the kinda lackluster mascots he was used with. I've seen most, if not all, of the surviving Wonka-related stuff under Mark Sweet's name, all the ones that don't require days and days of resources to find at least, and this guy really has grown on me. He feels like they took Gene Wilder and just kinda squashed and stretched him into a new mold, and it actually works. This Wonka feels unique enough to be his own separate ordeal, and I like him. He's really neat. I also like the addition of stage magic of all things. I do know it's because Mark Sweet is a magician in real life, and it just sort of carried into his Wonka persona, and I actually really love it. It really plays well into this version of Wonka. It just feels like something Wonka would be into considering how magical and logic-defying his candies are. And if you want me to be honest, it's something that I really wish was adapted into later versions of the character. If there is one complaint I have, it would be that this version of Wonka, while he has a lot of unique quirks, he's one of the most, if not the most forgettable Wonka candy mascot, like, ever. Maybe it's because his prime was over 40 years ago and the fact that he's part of a candy company that barely anyone cares about anymore. Like, aside from one or two people, I don't know anyone who says, oh yeah, I love and remember this version of Wonka. It's been far too long and his impact has waned to the point of non-existence. Overall, this version of Willy Wonka is really cool. He's getting a high B. Okay, so this version of Wonka is gonna be a doozy. Not only does it come right smack dab in the middle of the candy company's history, which completely throws my flow off track, but this version of Wonka also technically counts as lost media. I made an entire video essay covering this topic, så I won't go into too much detail here, but there is an entire feature-length Willy Wonka film that only aired and was only distributed in Sweden titled Kalle och Chokladfabriken, and to my knowledge you can only legally view it in Sweden by buying the movie he comes from on VHS. Said VHS tapes being very rare, and only in Sweden! This is something I'll rant and rave about later though, because it is relevant to the ranking, believe it or not. In terms of design, this version of Wonka is the best film recreation of the book version by far. Not just for the character, but for the entire film in general. Focusing on the character though, he has like all but one or two of the fixins. He has the black top hat, black goatee, he's short, the purplish coat. Literally the only two things they got wrong were the color of his pants and eyes. This version of Wonka has purple trousers, not green, and his eyes are also brown as opposed to blue. But these are relatively minor. That in this book was translated from English to Swedish, so I can imagine there might have been some confusion. But again, these are small problems. Literally everything else is just perfection. Like, in terms of what it's supposed to do, adapting from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, this is the best Willy Wonka movie. And this guy right here is one of the best versions of Wonka, period, if not for that one fact alone. Also, this version of Wonka is very, very squishy. What this dude might lack in humor strokes, he more than makes up for in what are some of the best facial expressions I have ever seen coming from any cartoon character, like, ever. The film has illustrations from Bengt Arne Rennerstrom, and he is so fantastic in his work. I've seen a few other works by Rennerstrom, mostly books illustrated by him, and the way he's able to convey emotions in his characters is just incredible. And Chokladfabriken is genuinely one of his best works. I am honestly surprised by the fact this film doesn't get more recognition based off of the visuals alone. The way that Wonka and other characters express themselves here is just pure perfection. I will reiterate, this is the best Willy Wonka film. The best adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, like, ever. From what I understand, this was done by a relatively small team. That and Roald Dahl was actually kind of involved in the making of this film, which is an added bonus. They took a bunch of illustrations from the book, bundled them all into one, and had Ernst Hugo Jagad provide some really great narration. This film is literally the best example I can think of when it comes to less is more. It isn't some amazing blockbuster with the best cast and crew ever, but I think it really worked out in its favor. Now, with all of the compliments I'm giving this dude, is he the best version of Wonka ever? Actually, no. I know this is going to sound very nitpicky, if not borderline unfair, but as I said before, this version of Wonka is largely lost media. Very little material of it still exists on the interwebs, and that's actually a problem for me. When I want to experience Wonka, I want to experience him in full, or at least mostly in full. I want to have the full package so I can enjoy it to the fullest extent, but for this version of Wonka, it's so difficult. There aren't enough bits and pieces of this version of Wonka that exist on the internet for me to give a definitive answer. That and the fact that I can't enjoy this movie in its entirety is dumb, it's sad, it's depressing, and it's very, very unfair. Oh, and they used to have it like on YouTube and on the SVT Open Archive, but like during 2018, they deleted it because they're a bunch of jerks like that. And it does knock it down a notch, but that does not stop this incredible version of Wonka from getting into the S tier. This is a version of Wonka that was used as the company mascot during the mid-90s, I believe, and this was back when Mark Sweet was in the Wonka business. Apparently, he changed his wardrobe to mirror this version of Wonka, which I guess is cool, and that's all about it. Yeah, this version of Wonka was a very short-lived mascot. He had a purple top hat, a sort of chubby face with a lot of blush accents for some reason, and really red hair. Goodness, this dude is a redhead. They did do some notable stuff with him though. During this time Wonka was in existence, Mark Sweet did like this Reading Makes Summer Sweeter campaign thing where kids in poverty got to obtain books and Mark Sweet read to them, which is pretty cool. They also had the sweepstakes thing for nerds where the first place winner got to go to Six Flags America. In all seriousness though, this version of Wonka is like getting a middle C. Not because I dislike him, but because there's barely anything to talk about. I wish I could say more, but I just can't. There's this cute little candy container that you can see on and off on like eBay and other shopping sites. That's something, right? Okay, so the Nestle Wonka mascot. We can all agree that this is the best version of Willy Wonka ever, right? That isn't me being sarcastic. I'm not being stupid or whatever. I do genuinely think that this version of Wonka is the best version of the character ever. But what exactly makes this the best version besides me just being a Wonka Company fanboy? Multiple things, actually. First, his design. It's like a weird mix of Gene Wilder Wonka and Book Wonka, and something about it really works. He has the softness of Book Wonka combined with the silly liminal weirdness of Gene Wilder Wonka, and it works and mixes perfectly. Especially when you consider this version of Wonka, and a lot of memorabilia surrounding him came from like the late 90s and early 2000s, so therefore he has like this weird, colorful webcore aesthetic. He has the green trails of Book Wonka, and they substitute a goatee with crazy sideburns, which I guess is a good trade. He also has the hair and pronounced nose of Gene Wilder. They took the best of both worlds and mashed them together in the best of ways. Personality-wise, he reminds me most of Book Wonka with a little bit of Gene Wilder Wonka mixed in. He has the bubbly playfulness and parent-esque care of Book Wonka, with a light hint of Gene Wilder branded sarcasm and funny. And like Gene Wilder, he also has so many memorable lines. He makes the joke about chewy vegetables in one commercial, and the line, dare I say, a bang, lives in my head rent-free. In the classic, "Oh, what will I think of next?" line, which, I kid you not, was trademarked by Nestle back then. And the amount of memorabilia that this version of Wonka has spawned. Oh my word, where do I begin? Well, first there's Wonka.com, which back in the day had your usual early 2000s website aesthetic with colorful backgrounds and graphics made of GIF images. It's a prime time capsule example of the early 2000s, and it's really something magical to behold. I will unapologetically admit that this one website and this version of Wonka in general is literally what got me into the webcore aesthetic. There's something about it that's just so off, yet really charming. And the Flash games! They may have been shoddy clones of random arcade games, but the Wonka branding makes them so fun. And aside from a couple of duds, a lot of them are really enjoyable for what they are. They're all based around the candy that was produced during that time in one way or another, and it really encapsulates the feeling of being a kid again, sitting down at the family computer and going onto the internet to play your favorite games based off of your favorite brand foods, or just playing games on the computer in general. And the commercials, oh my goodness, the commercials. They're like the best TV commercials ever, like no competition. They all show Wonka touring his amazing and wondrous factory, and they all look so cool, and they've aged surprisingly well, actually. This version of Wonka even had his own mascot costumes. The first one they used was in the late 90s, and they really aimed for trying to replicate the cartoon Wonka in real life, and it looks freaky, but at the same time I can't help but really love it. During this time, the company had a real-life Wonka-mobile that would tour across the US. They partnered with Reading is Fundamental, so they also taught the fun and value of reading. And the 90s Wonka-mobile was like this huge RV that had a little reading nook, so kids could go in and sit down and have Wonka read to them. The costume they used in the 2000s and in the 2010s, why? It looked a lot more friendly, and I love him so much. They had a guy dress up in this costume and tour the US in the upgraded Wonka-mobile, which was like a big purple food truck. And they'd go to things like event centers and amusement parks, and they'd hand out free candy wherever they went. I could only imagine how magical and awesome that would have been. The year is 2003, you're like 7 years old, you're at this fundraiser thing with your mom, and you see Willy Wonka, the legend himself, coming out of this huge purple van and just giving out free tasty treats. If I had to complain about one thing though, it would be like about the mascot costumes, because the one in the 90s they used looks horrifying. And the one they used during the 2000s, he looks really friendly and cuddly most of the time. But the other time though... he looks kind of horrifying, actually. The old website also had their own subscription service, which was known as Club W, which later became known as My Club Dub. And you could get stuff like birthday wishes and play exclusive games and be entered into sweepstakes. Please let me know I'm not the only person who remembers food sweepstakes used to exist like everywhere during the 2000s. If I can summarize 2 reasons why this version of Wonka is the best, it would be charm and memorability. There's just something about looking at this guy, watching the commercials, browsing through the old website on the Wayback Machine. It all invokes a sense of nostalgia and childlike wonder, feelings that I really just don't get with other examples of this kind of stuff. Which is kind of surprising to me considering how I sadly never grew up with this era of Wonka, but I digress. This version of Wonka, whether it be all the memorabilia left behind the company, the mysterious veil of the lost pieces of media that fell through the cracks, or just how fun and charming this version of Wonka is, it's just the best. And yes, I do know that there is a lot of Wonka lost media from this time period specifically. While it is a legitimate problem, I also feel like it adds to this Wonka sort of veil and charm. It almost feels like a treasure hunt, and whenever I find something from this era that's new, that hasn't been seen in like 20 some odd years, it just makes me feel like so good. It's everything that I described here and much more that makes retro Nestle Wonka the absolute best of the best. You know what, actually, I think the US has kind of had a field day with Willy Wonka, especially for the Wonka company. I think he needs to, like, take a vacation to the United Kingdom. Yeah, it's the country that started it all. So let's have Nestle Wonka and put him in the United Kingdom. What kind of mess would that create? Okay. Okay, so Nestle UK advertised Wonka in like a completely different way, and it is one of the most uncanny and freaky things I've ever seen in my life. The first thing you're going to notice is that they used 3D visuals for the UK branch marketing, and it makes UK Wonka look like a Five Nights at Freddy's character. Like, I'm not the only person who sees it, right? This version of Wonka just looks and feels really robotic. I don't know if it's the stiff way he's animated in the commercials or just how his model looks, but he just looks scary. And to be honest, I actually really like it. It feels so odd and different from what us US peoples are so used to. Seeing something like this, it's so new and refreshing, and I really like it. All in all though, it's literally just Nestle Wonka with more wild hair and the high-pitched voice he had in the books. If you really want to, then I guess this makes him the closest that any Nestle Wonka has ever been to emulating the original book Wonka. One of the UK exclusive candies they had was real-life square sweets that look round, and they had eggs inside them. What? Also, something odd is that they only sometimes use 3D Wonka on candy packaging. Most of the time they use 2D Nestle Wonka, which I really can't wrap my head around. The only time where I think they used 3D Wonka was on like selection boxes that had a bunch of different candies in them, and that's about it. Why didn't they use 3D Wonka on the UK boxes? I mean, this version of Wonka was used exclusively in the UK, so why don't you try and market off of him as much as you can? Did they think that kids were going to be scared of animatronic Wonka or whatever? I mean, I don't necessarily blame them. He's freaky looking. I can imagine this would scare quite a few 2000s UK kids. Now, since this is literally an uncanny 3D version of the best Wonka ever, you'd assume I really like him. Well, I'd like him a lot more if it weren't for the fact that this version of Wonka has the same problem that Sunmark Wonka has, except 1,000 times worse. It's worse because this was during the era of like early internet and shockwave games. And literally so little of Wonka UK branded everything still exists. It's all really bad cases of lost media, but the worst offender is the old UK exclusive website games they had, all of which are, I'm not joking, literally unplayable and are lost for the rest of time. I did a video on this topic as well, but the Wonka UK shockwave games worked in kinda weird ways. They had the DCR files, which is common for all shockwave games, but they also ran off as separate data files, which were known as director cast files, also known as .cct files, which are actually compressed versions of .cst files. .cst files basically being the same thing but without encryption. I understand that the US Wonka games worked in a similar way, but here's the thing though. All of the casts for the US Wonka games were internal casts, and were therefore more or less packaged with the game. It didn't work that way for the Wonka UK games though, and I can imagine it made preserving them borderline impossible. And only a very small handful of these CCT files still exist on the internet. And not only this, it is very difficult to view what is in these files unless you know exactly what to do. The solution is actually really easy. There's .cct files, but all you need to do is like rename them to .cst files to remove the encryption and then open them in Adobe Directory using the program's import function. But I need to emphasize there still isn't much to these. The sprite sets for like only 2 games have been mostly preserved, and it follows the same weird Five Nights at Freddy's World-esque art style. But still, other than that, there is barely anything that is still up on the internet. Before I made my video essay, literally only one dude on the internet who owned like a Millennium Museum blog or something actually talked about the games, and he said that they followed a narrative, had gremlins, and were, and I quote, less fun. Not to discredit the guy, I'm thankful that he mentioned them in the first place, but that is still barely anything! And this also follows the same logic as Swedish Wonka, but again, 1,000 times worse. I want to enjoy everything that UK Wonka and his antics have to offer, but try as I might, I cannot. There is so little that exists from this branch, and so little of it is found in intact media to the point where it leaves me feeling genuinely frustrated every time I view wonka.co.uk on the Wayback Machine. Like, look at these! Why are these redirects? Where did you even find these URLs and files to begin with? Did they always lead to redirects until recently? Are these actual files, or are these URLs up meant as like some sick prank meant to troll people? Like, what is going on? And another thing I want to talk about is something that kind of disturbs me. This version of Wonka is like one of the most evil out of all of them, like ever. In the commercials, there are these 2 random kid characters, and UK Wonka essentially uses them as lab rats. Like in the Exploder Bar commercial, he straight up puts them in like a test chamber, and their mouths explode from the Exploder Bars, and they walk out all dizzy and stumbling everywhere. Well, UK Wonka put like small firecrackers in their mouths, and all he has to say is that,
"Noisy eaters."
Okay then, you dingus. And in the Wonka Fruit Jellies Mix commercial, these 2 kids are being flung around the factory, potentially hundreds of feet off the ground and in the air. One of them gets electrocuted, and another one gets thrown into like a stained glass effigy of Wonka. And during this whole time, Wonka doesn't even say anything about it. He's just talking about stupid fruit snack bags that no longer exist. Like, did they want this version of Wonka to come across as super evil? Because congratulations, Armin Animations, it's really, really working. All in all, this version of Wonka is just not the worst thing ever, far from it, but the fact that most of him and his antics are lost forever, never to be seen again, is really depressing and genuinely frustrating, and it definitely knocks him back a couple notches. Still though, he's getting a high C. Okay, so this version of Wonka was seen in like one undisclosed claymation commercial for nerds, and the only place you can watch this commercial is on Vimeo, and we see a clay version of Wonka. He's neat, I like him. He's getting a low B. Okay, if this video has like proven anything, it's that I'm a man of controversial opinions. I have a lot of them. However, my opinion on this next version of Wonka coming up is probably going to be the most controversial one of them all. I mean, I ask you, how is that possible? I mean, I literally chose some weird freaky rubber version of Wonka from some obscure Swedish film that barely anyone cares about over one of the most renowned comedic actors of all time. What could possibly top that? Well, I present to you... Okay, before I say anything, I need to say this right now, right off the bat, because it's going to become extremely problematic if I don't, but I have absolutely nothing against Johnny Depp. I never did, and I doubt I ever will. I consider him an awesome actor and an overall good human being. And no matter what harsh things I say about this version of Wonka, nothing bad I say here is directed at Depp himself. I think Depp is a really great dude, but like any actor, he has a few dud characters. And 2005 Wonka is the most prime example out of all of them. So let's talk about it. This version of Wonka is probably one of, if not the most divisive one out of all of them, if you take the 2023 version out of the equation. You really love it or really dislike it, there isn't really much of an in-between. Many critics and audiences have given their profound opinions on this strange newcomer to the movie scene. And this version— okay, dude, look, this is the worst version of Willy Wonka. I don't even know why I'm trying to sugarcoat it. Okay, let's take this one step at a time. This version of Wonka has count them three main problems. And they are very big problems that boil down to very many smaller problems. Let's start with his physical design because, oh my god, why? Why does Wonka look like that? What? I don't think I even want to— you know what? No, I do know. I do know why he looks like that, because the 2005 film was directed entirely by Tim Burton. And like all Tim Burton characters, he's a crank pale boy with crank pale boy syndrome. He's a pale boy with really tidy brownish red hair, and he wears a plum colored suit. He has a dark undershirt and pants, and a black top hat with a fancy textured rim thing. He has the gloves. That's cool, I guess. And he has a cane with candies in it for some reason. No, I have to ask a few questions. Ones that I know aren't asked often, and these might be rather controversial, so I would like to apologize in advance if I get anyone riled up when I ask these questions. What happened to the gold-tipped cane from the book? What happened to his pants being bottle green? What happened to his little pointed goatee? What happened to him being middle-aged at least? What happened to his high and whistly voice? I know I sound like I'm pulling stuff out of thin air here, but I need you people to understand something about this film. This is specifically a reimagining of the 1964 book. Warner Brothers wanted the book to have a big influence on this film, much more than rather like the 1971 film or something. So there are many more things and set pieces from the original book. So, there is absolutely no excuse for Wonka to look like this. But guess what? It's a Tim Burton film, so of course he does. Seriously, when you compare these two side by side, it just points out everything wrong with 2005 Wonka design-wise. The book version of Wonka was this happy, playful old dude who was whimsical and full of color, and he had pep in his step. This version of Wonka is a stern twink who looks like he just got out of a classical music concert. This dude is a Willy Wonka, this dude is a hot mess! Look, I know that characters from books getting bad makeovers thanks to the movie treatment is common, but in terms of bad book character redesigns, 2005 Wonka is one of the actual literal worst. But you know what? All of this is only like a cherry on top of the rotten sundae when it comes to how bad 2005 Wonka is and how badly they butchered book Wonka. Because here's the second problem, his personality. Oh my sweet Neptune, how do you screw up a character's personality this badly? This version of Wonka has like the worst attitude problem I think I've ever seen coming from any character ever. And yes, I know that in the book and especially the 1971 film, Wonka could be a bit of a jerk, but there was a sense of subtlety to it. Neither version of them went deliberately out of their way to tick people off. And book Wonka actually kind of, gave a crap. In the book, there's a slight sense of, I care about these kids despite them being brats. He wants to see these kids mature into more behaved adults, and it feels like he was punishing them more out of tough love than anything. Here, Wonka is causing these kids misery, and that's it. He does not care about them. You know how people like to joke about how Wonka is a child-hating psychopath who only wanted to see the 5 kids suffer? I don't know if I believe that for every version of Wonka, but I believe it here, because this feels very much like 2005 Wonka is doing this for the sole purpose of hurting these kids. If you don't care about children at all, then why did you even start making chocolate, or everlasting gobstoppers, or tiny tangy crunchy eatables? You know what, that nerd's callback was bad. This crap is enough trauma without remembering what Wonka used to be before 2005. Also, this version of Wonka feels like he wants to showcase his factory only for bragging rights. In the book, Wonka felt like a child showcasing something he made that he was proud of. He wanted other people to see it and be proud of his work. He wanted other people to feel that same sort of happiness. This version of Wonka is just proud and wants to rub it in other people's faces. Either that or 2005 Wonka just wants the income money and nothing else. Next thing I know, Wonka is going to pull a Mr. Krabs and kick Charlie out of the factory so he can save a nickel. And if you don't think he'd do that, oh, he would. Believe me, he would. And if you don't believe me, then you haven't been paying attention. So, this character is an official version of Wonka, who was originally a peppy, happy old man in his book, is now a crank twink who has an attitude problem in the 2005 film. What in the frickin' frack? And here's the third thing. The third thing that is going to be kinda difficult to talk about. If you don't remember, in the book, Wonka reveals a kind of major piece of lore. He doesn't have any family of his own and therefore no children, which is a big reason why he sent out the golden tickets to begin with, to find an heir to his throne and potentially have a son figure in his life. Tim Burton decided that this wasn't tragic and relatable enough for him. So, you know what he did? You wanna know what he did? He took that one rather important piece of continuity, completely threw it out the window, and decided to do something very, very tacky. He gave 2005 Wonka a tragic backstory about his dad being an abusive little butt nugget. Wonka's father was a very strict dentist, and he put a gigantic pair of obstructive braces on his son. So Wonka decided to run away from home and become a candy recluse. After he came home from eating all of his candy, his dad relocated. And he also relocated his entire house because why not? Throughout the film we get little flashbacks about Wonka's past life with his dad, who at the end of the film we get to see finally reconcile with his son. I'm going to repeat myself again here, but I feel like I have to. I cannot emphasize this enough because it's 2005 Wonka's biggest problem. What Tim Burton did was take a character from a book who was a silly peppy old man who loved candy and didn't have any close family of his own, and he turned him into a creepy pale boy with an attitude problem, a deep hatred for humanity, and trauma from his abusive nut of a dad. Let that sink in for a minute here. You took a happy character whose lore was already well established and you shattered that by giving him a continuity-breaking tragic backstory. Do I need to explain how tacky that is? Do I? This film as a whole was supposed to be an adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and this version of Wonka is supposed to be like an adaptation to book Wonka. That is just embarrassing! With everything here that I just described, would you even call this a decent book-to-film adaptation? Would you even dignify this as Willy Wonka, like, at all? Do you people see now why I made the I can only describe Wonka, nothing else rule? Because this film seriously deserves its own dedicated video essay describing anything and everything terrible about it. It'll happen one day, Joseph. It'll happen one day. I will repeat myself one more time, because I seriously cannot emphasize this enough. 2005 Wonka is supposed to be like Book Wonka, but then it takes a massive diarrhea dump all over Book Wonka. Book Wonka may ironically not be my most favorite version of the character despite him being the genesis of the franchise, but I can't help but feel nothing but sorrow and pity for this man because his character has been absolutely destroyed. Okay, deep breaths. Okay, I'm feeling better now. Okay, so 2005 Wonka was a massive dud, obviously going into the F tier. I really do wish things get better for Wonka. Please let things get better for him in the near future. Please, please. Okay, I wasn't lying when I said things are getting better. Now, back in the day, I used to consider this like the worst version of Willy Wonka ever. this dude, the worst version of Willy Wonka, really. Yeah, well, I used to consider him the worst, but here's the thing, he's not. Like, he seriously is not. Instead, he only barely misses being in the lower C tier at this point. This version of Wonka may not be the worst thing ever, but in my eyes, he's like the worst Wonka Candy Company mascot. There's something about this version of Wonka, especially when compared to old Nestle Wonka, that just feels off. I feel like a large part of it is the attention to detail. Like, he has more attention to shading and lighting, he has a really dark color palette, and his hair is weirdly rubbery for some reason. It's like a caramel color and it's not all wild and woolly. As a whole, this version of Wonka just is not as wild and colorful as the version before him, and Something about it just rubs me off the wrong way. It's like comparing Tails the Fox to Tailsall. It's just all around uncanny weirdness. Functionally though, he's mostly the same as the version of Wonka before him. He had his own website, which I can't show you because large parts of it are sadly lost media because it relied off of Flash. Blah 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 blah, yay! However, there are many files left over on archive.org, like a PDF for rules describing a modified version of Softball called Wonka Ball. It's really cute, I like it. And this version of Wonka also had its own commercials, and they're pretty cool too. He takes two kids into like a non-disclosed level of the back rooms and then into a part of his factory. There are nerds' caves where they mine nerds off of stalactites, I guess that's cool. Oh, and there's also a Laffy Taffy roller coaster, which is pretty cool. Oh, and in terms of Flash games, they had a Sweet Tarts game where you shot Oompa Loompas to freeze dry them. That one is pretty fun. They had the Wannabe Wonka game, which is literally just a bad version of Lemmings. And the Great Nerds Chase, which is one of the most soulless Flash platformers I have ever seen. That's actually this version of Wonka's biggest setback. A lot of it just feels soulless. I get that this was later in the 2000s and times were changing and so were the company's target audience. But especially in the context of the last part, chunks of it feel like they're trying way too hard to pander to tweens. Like in 2006, they started selling these little LCD Wonkazoid game consoles. Yeah, LCD consoles. Remember those? I know I don't. I've seen the commercial for Wonkazoid, and it feels like a toy commercial trying desperately to get kids to pester their parents into buying it. Like, it looks and feels like something out of a cartoon. I've seen quite a few other little marketing tactics from the modern Nestle Wonka era, and a few of them are honestly kinda uncool. And trust me, when they get bad, they get bad. Like, for example, the old Wonka website during this time had a little thing where you could make your avatar and build a room for them, and they once held a contest sometime in 2007, I think, where the kid with the best virtual room could have their own room in real life, glorified and Wonkanized. However, the ads they used to promote this contest are some of the most painful ads I have ever seen. I was originally going to do a video where I did blind reactions to them, but then I realized I suck and blow at improv commentary, so yeah, that video's never seeing the light of day. But trust me, these wonked out room ads are just the worst. Like, remember how bad the cringy Chips Ahoy ads were a couple years back? And that's genuinely how bad these ads are. Like, they made a music video where two Oompa Loompas rap in your face. I really wish I was joking, but I'm not. These two munchkins are literally doing really bad rap and hip-hop, and it makes me want to throw up. You only get, like, one stupid musical ad before you're considered laughingstock material by the entire planet. But guess what? These people did 3 of these bad music video ads, back to back. And then there was the Laffy Taffy humor crisis. What they did was pull off the dumbest marketing stunt I have ever seen by making a huge deal about a claim that a Laffy Taffy joke wasn't funny. They held this massive campaign where they had people speak about Laffy Taffy and they solemnly swore to do better at monitoring the jokes on the Taffy rappers. And they held openings for Laffy Taffy joke submissions on their website. I really want you people to just let all of that sink in. Oh, and it gets worse because there's a video of an old dude up on a podium and he's giving this long winding speech about the bad joke and all the stuff they're pulling out in order to make sure the wild world of Wonka is purged of unfunny jokes. I would find the irony in it funny if the video didn't drag on for 9 minutes. It's 9 minutes of boring and it gets old fast. Literally the one thing in that video that made me laugh was this one lady in the audience who said, "He's acting like he doesn't even care." Like, twice. Like, seriously, they're treating this relatively minor and common phenomenon as a now very serious and forlorn issue. Like, a joke being unfunny is the equivalent of the factory getting attacked with ballistic missiles or Wonka becoming terminally ill or something. I'm being serious here, that's the joke. Would people of the 2020s find it offensive if this word like air today? I don't know, but honestly I wouldn't be very surprised if they did. Despite the fact that this is like cringe or whatever and we can all have fun poking fun at it and laughing at it, it's also kind of depressing because this is the first self-induced nail in Wonka's coffin. Nestle mostly did this to themselves, and I feel like their desperate attempts to pander to 11-year-olds were so bad even back then to the point where not a lot of people wanted anything to do with this company anymore. And to be honest, I don't really blame them. I will emphasize this again, 3 extremely bad and cringy music video ads, produced back to back. And since 2006, the Wonka company would just sorta slowly and painfully die until Nestle finally put it off life support in 2015. And this guy is the last mascot that Nestle would use for their Wonka advertising. By late 2008, early 2009, they rebranded and ditched the use of a mascot completely. Probably the saddest part about all this is something that's pretty existential. I can't help but think that the stunts they pulled back then are proof that the Wonka Candy Company should not be brought back. Because I'm afraid if they were brought back today, they would be pulling crap like this. I doubt it worked much back then, and I seriously doubt it would work today. Because if you pulled this kind of crap today, everyone would think you're the cringiest thing on the block, and no one would want anything branded Willy Wonka ever. Do I need to go on and why this is bad? Don't get me wrong, I want the company to come back someday, I really do. But at the same time, finding out stuff like this used to exist?
Boys, go online and make some noise.
It makes me very concerned. In all, this version of Wonka is far from the worst thing ever. He has actually kind of genuinely grown on me, and I do kind of like him. But the fact that this era of Wonka is the beginning of the end for what was the greatest candy company of all time, it depresses me. And that does knock this uncanny version of Wonka down a few notches. I will give them this though. This may be a kind of sloppy remaster of a great version of Wonka, but at least they didn't give this version of the character 2005 Wonka syndrome. And that puts him leaps and bounds ahead of this idiot. Modern Nestle Wonka is getting a middle C. Okay, fast forward like a decade, and this version of Wonka appeared in an adult coloring book. I have nothing against coloring books in general, and to be honest, I actually really like them. Coloring really helps with my anxiety. But this version of Wonka is just, oh no, it is the most chaotic thing I have ever seen in a book. Like this version of Wonka, the 2 pages I know he appears in the book at least, like there is far too much going on. And this design of Wonka is just kinda questionable at worst. Why is he wearing glasses? Why does he have like a pocket watch thing? I can understand that he has candies on his shirt, but is that detail really necessary? Is it really necessary that he has like fluffy cufflink things in his shirt? Why does he have like plaid trousers? That was never a detail in the book, and no freaking illustrations show that he has plaid trousers. And why does he have like, oh, socks on the outside of his trousers? Yeah, because Wonka's weird. And there's this one page which is just, no, why? Why is his hair being fused into the pipes? Why is his hat like a freaking machine, monster machine? And why is Charlie like running into his hat into an open door in what I can only assume is certain doom? All of it is just a bunch of chaotic, clunky weirdness that I just do not like. I do know that Wonka is all about magic and non-reason and stuff, but this is just overboard. This version of Wonka and the accompanying visuals are just too disorganized. In my eyes, one beauty of Wonka as a character is that most of the time his design is very simple and to the point, and he has these very simple yet recognizable traits that make him identifiable as Willy Wonka. Like top hat, cane, purple coat, sometimes he has a big nose. This version of Wonka is not simple. He has 1,000 things going on at once, and it's too excessive. Like, I don't hate this version of Wonka, and I know that a lot of adult coloring books do this kind of thing, and they aren't butchering the character or making him an edgelord or something, but there's just something about him and his uncharacteristically unruly brand of chaos that just I do not like. He's going in like the D tier. The only version of Wonka who I dislike, but it doesn't dip into levels of infamy. Okay, here's another controversial opinion. Tom and Jerry's Willy Wonka crossover is not the worst Wonka branded thing ever. I don't think it's amazing, I won't even call it good. The ranking I'd give the movie is like 5 out of 10 or something, but I'm reviewing only Wonka here, so there's something oddly charming about this version of Wonka for some reason. I feel like it's because it's an emulation of Gene Wilder Wonka, who was awesome to begin with. They do a couple of extra things and change things up with him a bit. They mostly do it because Tom and Jerry are shoehorned into the plot, but what they do does feel in character with 1971 Wonka, so at least they aren't like butchering his character. They kept his funny sarcasm, which is a bonus, and I also really love how he makes some incredible faces. It doesn't reach the level of sheer awesomeness of Swedish Wonka, but it is up there. The biggest factor that makes me sort of like this Wonka is the media he's coming from. Something about the Tom and Jerry crossover is just so stupid to the point where it's actually kind of enjoyable. Like, the film does have its glaringly obvious problems. Most of it is really clunky and unfocused, but at least they're trying to do it with a good film and not the disaster 2005 movie. However, this version of Wonka has its problems. First of all, he has like 2005 Wonka's hair kind of, it's a little poofy, so it isn't all clean and it has less red, but the presence of the different hair just gives off more questions than answers. Like, why is his hair like this? I know this was around a year after Gene Wilder died, rest in peace. So, did they think emulating him completely in this movie would have been disrespectful or something? I mean, a year after this, they made the stupid Match 3 mobile game called Wonka's World of Candy, which did emulate Gene Wilder, although in like a really lazy way. So do they care about this guy or not? Also, this version of Wonka only appears in the movie and literally nowhere else. There isn't like any merchandise or anything else I could find, which, if you haven't figured out by now, kinda ticks me off. Overall, this version of Wonka is okay. I'm giving him a lower C. Okay, before we cover the last version of Wonka, I wanted to give some insight on the honorable mentions, versions of Wonka that didn't make the cut due to them not abiding by my rules, so to speak. Stiff Willy Wonka Teddy Bear. I was originally going to put this in the list, but it's literally just Book Wonka in teddy bear form, and that's it. I also know Build-A-Bear did 1971 Willy Wonka teddy bears at one point, so both of them are going in the upper D tier. Christopher Lloyd Wonka. Hey guys, they did a dark and brooding version of Willy Wonka, and they did it right! This dude is literally just 1971 Wonka, but he's old and very scary. And it fits because he comes from a horror parody trailer. I just love how quirky and weird Christopher Lloyd makes his version of Wonka. It's great. Theoretical middle A tier. SNL Wonka. They took Gene Wilder Wonka but made him self-aware of how scary his movie could be. Look, I like this dude and his self-awareness, but can we start emulating another version of Wonka, please? Theoretical lower A tier. Epic Movie Wonka. Oh, you guys wanted to see an emulation of 2005 Wonka? Well, be careful what you wish for because we got one! Epic Movie is already a crapshoot by itself, but then they had the wonderful idea to parody the disaster 2005 film because why not? Like, I know this was only 2 years after the 2005 film, but to be honest with you, I find it really weird that they parodied that film instead of literally any other version of Willy Wonka. You wanna know why? Because the 2005 film is already a masterpiece failure, and it being highlighted here really shows how much of a flop Epic Movie is as a whole. And I mean what I said earlier, this one segment is literally 2005 Wonka done bad. Yay, poop jokes, and they use a guy's body parts inside a candy. Because I haven't heard those jokes been told a million, billion, trillion times. Would it theoretically be 2005 Wonka though? I have no idea, but look, if you really want me to, consider it a theoretical tie for 2005 Wonka. I do not feel like going on another tangent. 2005 video game Wonka. Literally, the one reason that this version of Wonka isn't on the list is because vanilla 2005 Wonka is, and aside from having different actors, these two are literally the exact same character. Only difference is that the video game doesn't literally personally offend me. It's a literal failed video game adaptation of a failed movie adaptation. It's crap that came out of more crap. And for some reason, it's just some of the funniest stuff in the world to me. Still though, it has to do with the 2005 film, so theoretical middle F tier. Sweet Tarts Hearts Wonka. This dude was on a Valentine's Sweet Tarts box, and he's on the honorable mentions mostly because I have not the slightest clue whether or not this even counts as Willy Wonka. Like, I seriously have not the slightest clue at all. This is something I am seriously going to have to spend time thinking about. I'm going to say no for right now because on the Collecting Candy blog, the dude owning it says this mascot existed before Wonka acquired the rights to Sweet Tarts. But then again, that also means that they own Sweet Tarts, so Upper F tier because he technically isn't really Wonka, that and he got a bad case of ugly! Mrs. Ice Pop. This is a character from a Unikitty episode, Unikitty in the Ice Pop Factory. This episode is literally Mad Max combined with Willy Wonka. Unikitty and her friends are trying to find the winning popsicle stick to get into Mrs. Ice Pop's magical popsicle factory. And there's just this huge war that results from it, and it's great. I love it. Literally, aside from like 1 or 2 dud episodes, I absolutely love Unikitty, and it's unironically amongst my most favorite cartoons ever. And I would put Mrs. Ice Pop in the theoretical upper A tier if it weren't for the fact that this character gives off like serious 2005 Wonka vibes, and I really don't know how to feel about that. First of all, her appearance just sort of like, it looks like 2005 Wonka and it feels like 2005 Wonka. That and the name of the episode revolves around someone who is expected to win a trip to the factory, not after the actual factory owner. Like the 2005 film and book, it's named after Charlie and not Willy Wonka, so she's going in the theoretical middle B tier. Lord Royal Highness. This dude was in a SpongeBob episode, and people call him a Willy Wonka character, but he actually isn't an honorable mention on this list. I'm only putting him here because I made an entire video essay covering the similarities between him and Willy Wonka, so someone would be questioning me about him if I didn't. He isn't included here because I know that people point this episode out as a Willy Wonka ripoff. I personally don't think so. I think a more apt term would be sloppy parody. It's not like the episode is directly trying to rip off Willy Wonka or be a cheap imitation of it. If you want my reasoning, then watch my Atlantis SquarePants video. As for LRH himself, theoretical upper C tier. Wonder Duck. This is a character from like some recent Duck Life games, and the only reason he's in the honorable mentions is because he gives off Willy Wonka vibes to me. Maybe it's the W theming or the purple aesthetic, but he just reminds me of Willy Wonka so much. I don't know if that was the developer's intention though. Either way, he's straight up getting a theoretical low S tier, if only because of the fact that it's a reference to one of my most favorite characters in what is unironically one of my most favorite game franchises. It's the best of both worlds! I have to wonder what his actual name is though. I don't remember it ever being disclosed. Portuguese Wonka. This dude was seen in like a Portuguese publication of the original book, and it's illustrated by Claudia Scatamica. And she actually does a really great job with her work in this version of the book. This version of Wonka looks very similar to Swedish Wonka, even right down to him having totally tubular facial expressions. And Portuguese Wonka also has a heavy stripes theme on his clothing, which I do like, especially because it makes him stand out. However, here's my one problem. This version of Wonka's impact on the world of Wonka is literally non-existent, which is why I only put him in the honorable mentions instead of the actual list. That and in concept, he's literally Book Wonka, albeit with some minor things added to him that make him stand out a bit more, like the stripes and him having a nearly full beard instead of just a goatee. Portuguese Wonka was just like only part of illustrations for a book, unlike Swedish Wonka, who got a book and his own feature-length television movie. I am not discrediting this version of Wonka or Claudia Scatamica though. They're both really cool, and I'm going to put this version of Wonka into the theoretical upper A tier. Monkey Man. This is a character from Hey Arnold, who is the show's in-universe major superhero icon turned retired celebrity. I've barely watched Hey Arnold in my lifetime. Like, the only episode I remember watching in full was that one episode where Arnold and his friend work at a flower shop and some beef forms between the two. And like, that's the one episode I remember from memory. Aside from that, I've never really watched the show, which is something I do want to remedy one day, since I have heard a lot of praise for the show and it does seem like a Nicktoon that would appeal to me. However, again, I haven't watched it much, so to avoid me sounding like an ignoramus or anything, I'm only going to be ranking this character by himself. The only reason he's on the list is because he looks a lot like Willy Wonka in his like retired outfit, which I do love how Hey Arnold of all shows parodied the character, and at least they aren't trying to copy Gene Wilder's outfit, which is an added bonus. Theoretical middle A tier. Broadway Wonka. One of the most popular Charlie and the Chocolate Factory adaptations, and yet I barely know jack about it. All I do know is that the musical was apparently not good. Though I have heard praise for this version of Wonka, one of the few praised things about the musical to my knowledge. I've heard things about this musical having modern elements, like Mike TV being a tech nerd and social media junkie, which is not a really good sign. I don't know anything else about it though, like at all. It just proves that no matter how knowledgeable I am about Willy Wonka, no matter how deep I dig, I still have not seen everything. Maybe this version of Wonka deserves praise, maybe he doesn't, I have not the slightest clue. I will do more research on him in the future, but for now this dude is getting like a theoretical middle B, if only because of how faithful his design is to Book Wonka. This dude is like unironically the most perfect rendition of Book Wonka design-wise, which I will give major credit for. And finally, Timothy Chalamet Wonka. I didn't include him in the actual list mostly because, while this is an official Willy Wonka, he technically hasn't been realized in full yet, and because of that I feel like it would be really unfair to give him some kind of major ranking, at least right now. I don't want to give him a bunch of empty compliments and whatever, and then immediately have him turn out to be like 2005 Wonka 2.0 or something, or me give major critiques about him and seem all harsh and then have Chalamet's performance be the best thing ever. It just really doesn't sound fair to me. If I did have to give him a rank right now though, it would be like theoretical middle C tier, like right in the very middle, because I don't really want to give him any positive or negative reviews right now. That's how I feel about him right now. I think he's just okay. Okay, so with all of that, what note do we end this on? What is this version of Wonka to currently end all Wonkas? Is it a never-before-seen version of Nestle Wonka? Is he from a hyper-obscure lost film? Could it be something far greater, something that will forever change our understanding of the Willy Wonka universe? Actually, no. Okay, so we end this video off on a kind of lackluster note, if I'm being brutally honest. This is far from the worst Wonka ever, however, I feel like it's really dumb for the final major version of Wonka, for this video at least, to be one made for some television commercials advertising a business plugin of all things. Again, I don't hate this version of Wonka at all. I think he's one of the much better ones, actually. He's pretty good, albeit with a couple of flaws. Let's start with the positives first. I love these commercials. I really do. They're really beautiful and look like an upgraded version of the 1971 factory. I especially love how they expanded his office with the little slide thing. I love that. It really feels like the office of the greatest candy maker in the world. Speaking of which, this version of Wonka, based off these commercials, is very concerned with business. And I'm actually not bothered by this concept. I mean, Willy Wonka is the greatest and most renowned candy maker in, like, history. And yet barely any version of Wonka goes into stuff like compliance and ethics and sales, stock markets, inventory, and all the other bells and whistles of running a business. Which seems a little counterintuitive considering, again, he runs the largest candy factory on planet Earth. We get to see Willy Wonka being an actual businessman in these commercials, and they're able to make it work. I also like the little extra ideas they explore here, like how they have a coconut plant explode and it makes it snow everywhere, and Wonka literally making edible vinyl discs, and he also eats a little toy car that's made out of candy. I like that. Like, it all fits really, really well. I also like how this version of Wonka just feels unique in terms of his personality. He's happy and warm, yet he almost has this awkward edge to him, and it fits into what Wonka is supposed to be. However, this is like my big problem. In terms of appearance, he's literally 1971 Wonka with black hair. I have seen so many other versions of Wonka try and emulate Gene Wilder, and to be honest with you, I'm kind of tired of it. You can only emulate the greats for so long and have it work for so long before people start to just sort of ignore you. I really feel like they should have taken more liberty with the design, instead of putting Dominic Marsh inside of a Gene Wilder Wonka costume. Make his hat purple, or have his trousers be a lime green color, or make his bow tie like a dark red. Make this version of Wonka at least different compared to other versions, even if it's something small. I know I'm nitpicking, but it's something that does really bother me, and it's something that does bring this version of Wonka down. Overall, this version of Wonka is pretty good, but he doesn't really stand out enough to be considered one of the greats. He's going in the middle B tier. Okay, so here is the completed tier list. Oh my gosh. Just for reference, here's an older tier list that I made at the end of a slightly older Wonka video. Oh, how things have changed. Honestly, would love to know how you guys would arrange this list. Please let me know in the comments. Anyway, I don't really have much else to say other than peace on and have a wonderful day.